Good morning, everyone. It's great to be here. A great honor to open the debate today. We have here Feliciano Guimarães, who is the director of academic of CEBRI, and also the new representative of Fundação Konrad Adenauer in Brazil, Maximilian, for the first time here at CEBRI. And also with us, Isabel Rocha Siqueira and Kai Eno Lehmann, and online Ambassador Marian, the Ambassador of European Union to Brazil, and Alberto Jaguaribe, the Ambassador of Brazil in Germany. Thank you very much. Welcome. Feliciano will coordinate the debate now with Maximilian. So please, welcome.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. My name is Feliciano Guimarães. I'm the academic director here at CEBRI. It's a pleasure to be here to host again our annual meeting with Konrad Adenauer Foundation in Brazil, and I'd like to welcome Maximilian here in Brazil for your new tenure for many years to come, I believe. So thank you very much for being here. So CAS is one of CEBRI's most important partners. We've been working together for over 20 years. We organize the 40 conference every year, Security and Defense, which is today's the #1 Security and Defense conference in Latin America. We're going to organize next year again in September. Hopefully in the Museu do Amanhã here in Rio. We're starting to discuss that. And here today we have this panel entitled Enhancing Cooperation Between Europe and Brazil, Challenge and Perspective. And as Julia mentioned, we have Maximilian, the director of CASA in Brazil, Ambassador Roberto Jaguaribe from Germany, Brazilian ambassador to Germany, Ambassador Marian Schuigraf, Ambassador of the European Union in Brazil, Professor Isabel Rocha Siqueira, Professor and Director of Institute of International Relations at the Catholic University in Rio, and my colleague Kai Lehmann, Professor at the University of São Paulo. Throughout the year, we organize here at CAS, here at CEBRI, a number of panels and meetings discussing the relationship between Europe and Brazil. And Professor Kai wrote a report that we're going to discuss today, with discussing the relationship, but also make a series of recommendations about how the relationship between Europe and Brazil should play out for the next year. So every speaker has approximately 10 minutes to give a talk. And I'd like to pass the word to Maximilian. And thank you again for being here with us.
Thank you very much, Feliciano. Thank you very much to everyone who is participating online and here in Rio de Janeiro. My name is Maximilian Hiedrich, as was already mentioned. I'm here since 10 days now. I arrived last Saturday in Rio de Janeiro as a new representative for the Konrad Adenauer Foundation here in Brazil. On behalf of the foundation, I would welcome you all, especially Ambassador Schuigraf, Ambassador Jaguaribe, and our panelist here, Isabella Rocha y Kai Lehmann. For us at CAS, as you mentioned, Feliciano, it's a very, very important opportunity for myself and CAS to be here. It is my first event as new director with our long-standing partner, CEBRI. As you mentioned, one of our main flagship events is the 4GT Copacabana, also for CAS international-wide and in Latin America. As foundation, we promote democracy values, we promote peace, justice, and of course, one issue is the promotion of the European integration and unity. So this topic is perfect for me to start. Although we're in moments of crisis, and funnily, or maybe not funnily enough, the current German word of the year is crisis mode. We're facing a lot of crisis nowadays, not only a war taking place in Europe, the Russian invasion and aggression towards Ukraine, also now the terrorist attacks of Hamas in Israel. But we have so many complex topics in the world that we can only do and work on together, deal with together, like climate change, energy transition, cybersecurity, now the new topic, maybe not so new, artificial intelligence, but also organized crime. How can we deal with this alone? Only the European Union, or only Brazil, or only Latin America? So for us, it's a very, very important topic to work on to reinforce and strengthen the relationship between the European Union and Brazil, but also all Latin America. Therefore, we worked as CAS for a long time in promoting the agreement between EU and Mercosur, that we hope maybe we can get it done and over with, because we actually think that it has more perspectives and benefits than challenges. So to not extend myself, I just wish you all a very, very pleasant debate. We work here in Latin America for more than 60 years. That's where our heart is as CAS, as foundation. We started in the early 60s in Venezuela and Chile, and then shortly after here in Brazil. So it is not only an important political, economic relation, but also emotional relation. So I wish us all a very, very nice debate, and thank you very much for the audience here and to the audience online. I hope we have a very, very nice debate, and the floor is yours now. Thank you.
Thank you, Maximilian. Now I'll pass the floor to Ambassador Roberto Jaguaribe, who is the ambassador of Brazil in Germany and also very good friends of CEBRI. Ambassador, you have the floor. Thank you.
Feliciano, I'd like to greet all of my colleagues. And of course, I'm not just a friend of CEBRI, I am a member of the Council of CEBRI. And of course, I am speaking from Germany, and I do have a German bias. So I have the privilege of being ambassador of Brazil here and to see the European question through German eyes. But Germany, as you all know, is the most important country in the European Union, economically for many, many years already, but also increasingly politically. And it is also a country that has more or less, more than others, a very stable government for the past many, many, many years, less political convulsion than other places in Europe. And of course, this lends more strength to the German participation. I think that all that has been said is quite correct. We are natural partners between Latin America, South America in particular, and I would even go further, say Mercosur even more than the rest of South America and Europe for several reasons. We have the values that approach us. We have the democratic relevance that is fundamental. We have history, we have immigration, we have many, many coincidences, and we have many complementarities. And of course, Europe has, through the years, been the most important investor in Mercosur, in Brazil in particular, a very big trading partner, and obviously a very significant reference. And this has pointed politically Brazil and South America and Mercosur countries in a direction which I say is very much influenced by European politics and by European policies. We are in a very interesting time where many challenges are reoccurring, including many that we thought would not take place, and I'm referring specifically to the invasion of the Ukraine. We are facing global challenges that require cooperative efforts at the global level. And I think we are more than ever in a situation where the partnership between these two regions and between Brazil and Europe become more evident. But that is not to say that it is going to take place. In spite of all that I just mentioned, Europe has lost continuously space, both politically and economically and commercially in Latin America and in Brazil and in Mercosur. And people talk a lot about China, and China obviously is a very clear an important actor. But to be candid, Brazil's trade with non-Chinese Asia is already 25% larger than Brazil's trade with Europe. Trade between Mercosur and South Latin America and China grew by more than 25-fold this century, and by Europe it grew by 2. And of course, there is a reshaping of international center of gravity, and Europe is no longer in that center of gravity. But Eurocentrism is still an element that is very present, even outside Europe, in Latin America as well, but obviously very much in Europe. But in my assessment, the fact that we have all of these elements that are very much pushing towards a closer integration, there are different challenges that are being placed because of democracy, the challenges to democracy, and because of perceptions which have not accompanied the rhythm of the relevance of the complementarities of the two regions. I've been in Germany for 5 years, and I've witnessed many changes. At the present time, we just had, and I cannot but mention the first strategic high-level intergovernmental consultations in 8 years. They were extremely successful. Both sides were very happy with the results. President Lula termed it the most successful visit and interchange he has ever had with Germany, and called the 4th of December a historic day because it will be the rebirth of a very important partnership between Brazil and Germany. I think this is all very much true, very much possible, but there are major challenges from both a political side and an economic side to ensure that this become a reality. The first element that I want to point out is the fact that because of its success, and the European model has been a huge success, in my view, Europe is facing different challenges now. One of them relates to its vision of the rest of the world. And of course, although we essentially share the same values, the view from above is very different from the view from below. And perceptions with the same values change enormously. And of course, I don't want to go into that, but just the two most recent conflicts in Israel and in Ukraine are very clear points in relation to what I am referring to. But the other issue refers to the fact that there is a certain dose of complacency together with a certain dose of arrogance that makes it complicated to deal with Europe many times. And I think that the fact that Europe has essentially overcome the basic challenges of humanity is one of the issues that creates different perspectives in many different circumstances, including, of course, in global governance and in actions related to global problems. But I am optimistic in the sense that there is a great political will in most countries. I think that Brazil is clearly dedicated to concluding the Mercosur European Union trade agreement. I have never seen Germany so determined to do so as well. Of course, there are countries, especially France, which made it very clear that they are not in favor of the agreement. President Macron made that clear during the Dubai COP very recently. And we were not able to conclude the negotiations that we hoped we would be because of some problems with Argentina. But on the good side is the fact that the new Argentinian government, which everybody was concerned would not show any interest in Mercosur and in the continuation of these negotiations, has made it already very, very clear that they are committed to proceed in this path. I think this is a very clear opportunity that we should not let pass. And I think that for us in Latin America, it presents a in Mercosur, it presents a very clear opportunity because of the umbrella where we fit, which would be conducive to more investments. It does not represent, as many people believe, a true commercial opportunity because effectively there is no major concession that was made by Europe, except in industrial tariffs, which are already so low that they are really not going to present a major impact. But I believe that this is very important for Europe, because Europe is facing increasing challenges, including in the competitive nature of its economy. And this includes, of course, Germany, which is the biggest economy and usually the most competitive of all European countries. This competitive nature, the issue derived from several different problems, many of which can be adequately tackled through the complementarities that exists between Brazil and the European Union, between Mercosur and the European Union. And they, of course, relate to sustainability and the fact that Brazil and Mercosur, and South America in general, is a major exporter of sustainability. And this includes, of course, raw materials, energy, renewable energy, water, and all natural supplies, which are in abundance in our region, and in short supply in Europe. Of course, this has a close relation to demography and demographic density, and Northern Europe in particular is affected with extraordinary density. The Netherlands, for instance, if we had the Netherlands demographic density, we would have 4.5 billion people in Brazil. And of course, we also would not be sustainable. And of course, I am stressing the word sustainable because there is a conflictive narrative in relation to who is sustainable. And I think this is part of the problems that we have inherited politically to push ahead with the Mercosur European Union trade agreement. But I think that the realization that we are able to provide very important inputs, which Europe is lacking increasingly, including sustainable energy, is making it very, very attractive for many countries, including Germany, to give a definitive push in this direction. Is it going to be possible to have this agreement? It's still a question, an open question. Unfortunately, we were not able to have the last round of negotiations. I hope it can come soon enough. As I said, there's a promising fact that Argentina has shown willingness to go ahead quickly with this process, but there are major problems in Europe. There are still so many other questions related to global governance, the participation in multilateral mechanisms which bind us together, but which presents challenges because of different perceptions of the G20, which again is one of the most, let's say, single most relevant fora for being able to tackle major global issues. But it has been, to a certain effect, paralyzed because of the introduction of non-economic issues such as the Ukraine issue, which become fundamental for some countries. And obviously, it's something where no agreement is ever going to be reached. So if there is an insistence in bringing always these non-agreeable issues into the G20, the ones where we can agree upon are going to suffer. And that includes, of course, climate change, which is a fundamental issue, and many other economic elements, which were the origin for the G20. So I think there are many very important potentials, but we still face many challenges derived from perceptions which are not coincidental, in spite of the fact that the values essentially are the same. I don't want to extend myself because I've already spoken more than 10 minutes. But I believe that we are now in a situation, in a place where we can do many things about it. In fact, I am sure that what we had here with Germany is going to create a different dimension. And I hope that this can expand to other areas of Europe as well, and can push for the validation of the Mercosur European Union trade agreement, because this would be a gigantic step towards increasing the relevance of the cooperation between the two regions. Thank you.
Roberto, hello. Thank you, Ambassador Roberto Jogareba. It's always a pleasure to hear you. Now I pass the floor to Ambassador Marian Schuegraf from the European Union in Brazil. Ambassador, you have the floor. Thank you.
Bom dia from Brasilia. Thanks for pronouncing my name better than most of Germans. I try to reciprocate with pronouncing correctly you, Feliciano de Sá Guimarães, Maximilian Hedrich, panelists and guests. It's both a pleasure and a privilege to participate today in this event, cementing a long-standing relationship between the EU delegation and Brazil, CEBRI, and the Konrad Adenauer Foundation. EU-Brazil bilateral relations have markedly improved since Lula took office. I think this is a very welcome news, which is now being taken for granted and should continue whatever government comes thereafter. This improvement has been driven by personal contacts and the conclusion of new agreements and memoranda of understanding, which we saw as of late in Berlin as well. And we are very happy to hear President Lula being so pleased about that visit. We have, and I think it's worth mentioning, since President Lula's taking of office in January this year, we had more than 70 high-ranking ministerial and higher-level meetings between Brazil and the EU and member states. I think this speaks for itself. And there is still the interest to further step up our commitment. Let me mention some highlights. The EU counts on Brazil as bilateral, as a regional, and as a global actor and partner. As one of the EU's bilateral strategic partners, the EU and Brazil have relations based on trust and shared values. And this is not only an empty phrase in today's times. Beyond that, I think there is still far more untapped potential to fill our partnership with life in the coming years. So we are working to organizing in 24 the first EU-Brazil summit since 2014. This is actually 10 years then of a distance, and this is unacceptable. So we try to change that. We want to focus on a range of thematic highlights. We want to get more focused in our relationship, and some of those would be an inclusive digital development, social equality, climate change and environment, energy, security and defense, justice and human rights, critical raw materials, and trade, of course. One of the main instruments for implementing our bilateral cooperation with Brazil is the Global Gateway. Global Gateway is the EU strategy to boost smart, clean, and secure links in digital, energy, and transport sectors. Future Global Gateway projects with Brazil could include initiatives in the fields of bioeconomy, economy, energy like renewables, energy efficiency, or green hydrogen, water and sanitation, and digital transition. Of course, we will also continue our strong support to the Brazilian civil society and promote exchanges with the private sector. In the context of the Latin American region, I would like to mention Brazil's role in Mercosur and the negotiations of the already before mentioned EU-Mercosur association agreement. So from being present since my arrival here in Brazil, beginning of September, I can say that these negotiations and the communication with our Mercosur partners, and especially Brazil in its function as presidency, has been constantly constructive. Over recent months, the EU and Mercosur made really considerable progress, and we continue to negotiate constructively in order to finalize the agreement as soon as possible. We still aim for a deal that is mutually beneficial, corresponding to the strategic nature of our ties, and that can provide crucial contributions to address global challenges in areas such as sustainable development, equality, and multilateralism. I would like to reiterate that the EU-Mercosur agreement is for sure not only a trade agreement. Even more so, it's a political and a geopolitical agreement, as it's meant to bring closer and even associate our two regions. We were very encouraged to hear Foreign Minister Mauro Vieira echo this conviction at the opening of the Mercosur ministerial meeting on the 6th of December in Rio. He said that the agreement has an undeniable strategic dimension and that it would be the turning point for bi-regional relations and for our economic dynamics. Now that Argentina has a new government, we need to agree with the new negotiation team on next steps and on an ambitious timeline. As for Brazil's CELAC membership, the EU, of course, welcomed Brazil's decision to reintegrate the group as soon as the new government started. We markedly felt Brazil's positive impact on CELAC, also through President Lula's participation in the July EU-CELAC summit in Brussels. His presence energized the event and contributed to its success. On the global stage, President Lula has truly shown that Brazil is back in a number of contexts. In the context of the UN, for example, Brazil has demonstrated over the last 2 years as non-permanent UNSC member its multilateral credentials and leadership. The EU and Brazil see eye to eye on the need to reform the UN Charter, including amending veto rights and enhancing the Security Council's representativeness. In order to closely align on multilateral issues, the EU and Brazil plan to relaunch our dialogue on UN matters in 2024. As a renewed member of the UN Human Rights Council from 1st of January onwards, Brazil and the EU will closely coordinate on human rights situations around the globe. Brazil's first G20 presidency is clearly a challenge, but I don't doubt for a single moment that Brazil will accomplish this successfully, even if it's spread over the whole country. That will be logistically very interesting, and I'm sure it will contribute to the success. By the way, today starts the first Sherpa meeting here in Brasilia. Under the heading Building a Fair World and a Sustainable Planet, President Lula will be able to elevate his national priorities to international ones and establish Brazil even more as a key voice on the global stage. The EU stands ready to assist and work with the Brazilian institutions in the challenging months ahead. I couldn't end my intervention without referring to COP30 in 2025, which will cement Brazil's position as a global environmental leader. The EU very much acclaims Brazil's commitment to galvanize climate and environmental policies and will be a reliable partner on the road to the lane. In summary, EU-Brazil relations are deep and wide. In today's world, friends are fewer and wider apart. The EU and Brazil, we need to combine our strengths in order to defend our common interests and identify solutions jointly to the global challenges we face. The EU is deeply committed to driving this relationship forward, and I look forward to contributing to this in the coming years I'm here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much. Now we'll continue the debate. As I mentioned before, throughout this year, 2023, we organized with CAS a number of panels in Brazil. One of the most interesting ones is the one that I participated in Belém during the summit that Brazil organized in, I don't remember, it was March, April, June of this year. We organized together, and then we organized also a series of meetings in Brasilia and also in Rio. And Professor Kai Lehmann followed all these meetings and heard all the speeches and all the discussion. And then we requested this very challenging job for Professor Kai, which is to write a report on the state of the art of the relationship between Brazil and European Union. So he wrote a report entitled Relations between Brazil and the European Union in a Time of Permanent Crisis, Reflections and Proposals for Action. So I invite everyone to download the PDF. It's on CEBRI website. I'm sure it will be on CAS website already or will be there soon. And it's a very interesting report. It's a 40 pages report in which Professor Kai overviews most of our bilateral relationship. It makes a number of reflections and also recommendations to that effect. And we invited Professor Isabel Rocha, who is a good friend of ours here at CEBRI. She's a professor at the Catholic University of Rio, International Relations, but also a member of the BRICS Policy Center, which is another think tank, but also located in Rio, to make comments on Professor Kai's report. So, Professor Kai, so how is the relationship between Brazil and Europe in the years to come? What are your main takeaways from the report? Thank you very much for writing the report and being here with us.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much, first of all, for the invite to come here. It's not my first event for CEBRI, but it's the first one I'm actually doing in this building after 16 years in Brazil, so it's good to be here. Thank you very much. I also like to thank for the opportunity to actually write the reports. I hope it'll be useful. And I've trying to distill a 40-page report into 10 minutes is challenging. So I'll come from some core themes that I think cross the issue areas that I looked at. So what core problems do I see in the EU-Brazil relationship across the environment, energy, trade, and multilateralism, which were the 4 areas that the report covers. And I'll come across essentially, I think, 4. But first, I'll have a little diver to look at what I would call the cooling off of the relationship in recent years, and I'll highlight some worries that I have. I think Brazil-EU relationship is a long-standing one. It's a very profound one. It's a very deep one. There are lots of areas of common interest, but the last, I would say, 10 to 15 years have seen a cooling off of that relationship, which I think is down to 2 things. One is events, and one is more strategic, I think. One, the events is, as the title of the report indicates, permanent crisis. And that crisis has turned to what I call an inward turn, both in Europe and Brazil, which is essentially that governments have looked at their own problems in their domestic audience rather than looking at international cooperation as a way of solving problems. That's number one. The second one, which I think is more structurally challenging, is that as a result of that, we've had profound changes in the political landscape in Europe and Brazil. The rise of populism and more, I think, more challenging, the rise of governments and political leaders that not only don't use multilateral structures, but actually are against them as a matter of principle. They don't want them. And we've seen this in the European Union, Hungary, now the Slovak Republic, and we've seen it in Brazil. And my worry is, even though the EU ambassador, I think, said quite rightly, there's been a marked improvement in EU-Brazil relations since the return of Lula to government, is that once he leaves government, whether that will be in 3 years' time or 7 years' time, whenever that might be, that we go back to what we had in the last 4 years. So my worry is that the improvement is not necessarily a reflection of a change of a policy of state or a policy of organization, but it's a policy of government. And governments change, and that's a good thing. But it does worry me that we may be seeing the improvement that we may be seeing at the moment is temporary. So I think there are, I would argue, 3-4 issues that we need to look at to make sure that that doesn't happen. This improvement is permanent. One is really basic. Get to know each other again. I think one of the challenging, or one of the striking things is that there's been a lot of sort of, in diplomatic terms, discord about Ukraine, about the environment and so forth. And yet, if we actually looked at Lula's long-standing foreign policy or the European Union's long-standing views of conflict, that discord, we don't need agreement, but they shouldn't have come as a surprise. Brazil's position on Ukraine, I profoundly disagree with it, but it's not a surprise. It is entirely predictable, and it was entirely predictable, and as such, it shouldn't have caused the diplomatic issues that it did. And the same with the EU's position on the environment, or we can disagree on these, but they shouldn't be a surprise. And I think that has cost an awful lot of time and an awful lot of political and diplomatic capital, which really needn't have been spent. So one of the key issues is get to know each other again, know what the other side strategically is thinking, and define, based on that rapprochement, areas of common interest, which can lead to quick practical achievement. And I say that because, as I said, I'm quite worried that what we're seeing at the moment is a temporary improvement of relations, and we can only make that permanent again if we can show practical results of that particular relationship. And that, I think, leads me to my third point, which is the reinstating or the reinforcement of the structures of a permanent bilateral relationship. So the ambassador said, quite rightly, and I think that's positive, the number of ministerial meetings and meetings between the Brazilian government and the EU that have been over the last year. I think that's excellent news. I hope it continues. But will these structures survive changes of government? Will these structures survive the European Parliament elections of next year, for that matter? It's not just a Brazilian issue; it's a European issue, and I think we should work with urgency on making sure that these structures are embedded. So that once again, Brazil-EU cooperation becomes a policy of state, which can bring about quick, practical results. And that brings me to, I think by my time, it's already my final point, which is what areas can we use, or what areas can we work on to bring those quick, practical results? I think there are two. One is energy. That's been mentioned, where certain Brazilian states are highly advanced and highly progressive in that respect, and we should really do everything we can as the European Union, to engage in a practical sense with these states, CERA being one clear example. The second one, it seems to me, is local economic development, which is linked to that point, and engagement with civil society and industry in that respect. So what can energy cooperation, for instance, bring in terms of practical economic benefits for local populations? I go into quite a lot of detail in the report. I don't have time to do that now. We can discuss that later. But that brings me to my final point, which is communications. Very, very often I engage with universities, industry, outside Brasilia, outside USP, outside Sao Paulo, and they go to me and they're quite genuinely, what does the European Union actually do in Brazil? What are the practical benefits for that? And the same goes for EU-Brazil cooperation. It's not, it's not a one-sided thing. I think we do a lot of academic lectures on EU-Brazil cooperation, and sometimes somebody will come up to me afterwards. I remember once in Belo Horizonte from the Minas Gerais Chamber of Commerce. He said, so in a practical sense, what does Brazil-EU mean for me? There needs to be a much clearer, more consistent and joined up, it's very trendy word, but a joined up strategy between the Brazilian government and the EU to say constantly, repeat constantly, this is what we do and these are the benefits for the 95% of people who don't really care about politics. And I always say this, it is absolutely critical that we do engage with the 95% of people who do not do what we are currently doing here, sitting here talking about politics. Brexit got done because it appealed to the 95% of people who just want, take back control. It sounds really good. Load of nonsense in a practical sense, but it sounds really good. And in a positive sense, I think the EU and Brazil in their cooperation have had enormous difficulty in putting into one phrase, two phrases. This is what the cooperation is good for, and this is what it does for you. And I think we need to start working on that. We need to continue working on that urgently to embed it before political governments change again. That may make progress in this relationship much more difficult. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Kai. Thank you for your remarks. You did a very good job in summarizing a 40-page report in 10 minutes, so thank you very much. The staff just helped me here that the report is not ready yet. It's going to be ready in a couple of days. We're editing to put online, so that's why Kaz doesn't have yet the final version. We're almost there. In a couple of days, we will have it to download, so be in tune. We're gonna, just another information, we're gonna have a brunch right after the panel. We are already receiving questions from our audience online, so we're gonna open for questions after Isabel's remarks and for the audience here as well. So Professor Isabel, what are your main takeaways from the report and the state of the relationship between Brazil and Europe? Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for the invitation and thank you for having me. So I guess I'm privileged because I had access to the report. Okay, I'm not. So I'm going to tell you some secrets, I guess. So taking on the last point, taking from the last point that you mentioned, I think the report did a great job of setting the common ground, and I think you're right. I think most people don't have a clue of how important that cooperation is. And the fact that, for instance, you mentioned the EU CELAC report from the last forum that just happened this year. And in that report, I also went to check the new data. And the EU is still the main partner in terms of foreign direct investment in Latin America. And it's by far the main partner. And I don't think the large public has any idea of that. And that kind of data doesn't communicate very well. And for some reason, it's not streaming down to the main, to popular media, I guess. And also, it's interesting to see in which sectors these foreign direct investments go into, and some of which you have all mentioned here: green energy, education, environment in general. But I want to focus on, of course, coming from where I'm coming from the university, from academia. I think one of the key points that and one of the key recommendations in your report as well is the fact that the EU is a great partner in terms of academic research and research in general. The kind of support that we don't get elsewhere, and the kind of support that is valuable and invaluable at the same time, because it's tangible, it comes with funding, and although it comes with funding that's often short-term, which is a problem, but it does come with funding, and it does come with certain alignment with our values, which is very important. And the second point that I want to highlight, I think there is a clear pendulum movement that we are living through, and that the report touches upon, but doesn't, I think it's not in a position yet to analyze, and maybe just we are opening the door to kind of looking into it for now. But I think you set the tone when you say there is the side of the normative values, there is the side of the practicalities. So we need investments, we need technology transfer, we need reindustrialization, we need economic investments, but we also need support for our normative values. And what we are going through right now is Brazil is really living through several dilemmas, actually. There's the BRICS expansion, and I've just recently published a short piece on the social demographics issues related to the BRICS expansions, because no one's looking at the social demographics. And there are going to be huge problems there, for instance, regarding to women's rights and gender issues, for instance. There are many differences in between those countries and the countries that are to become members. And of course, we're seeing a stalemate today in COP28 regarding fossil fuels. And some of the countries that are acting very strongly in order to stop any kind of deals in that regard are the ones that are supposed to become BRICS members. So what is Brazil going to do about that position? If we are going to be a strong voice in the international system, we are going to have to position ourselves, even though, of course, in diplomatic terms, we can always go for a middle ground in certain contexts. For certain positions, we're going to have to be more assertive, and counting with the European Union for affirming certain values is going to be very important, I think. And last, I think, in terms of the economic interests and the main areas where we are already cooperating, but also where the opportunities exist, and you highlight them all. I think, of course, one of the main areas where the opportunities exist is in the environment and the climate change agenda. But one of the key aspects of that is in the asymmetries that you diagnosed. So there is an asymmetrical relationship there, where we don't get to see a lot of technology transfer, and we don't get to see a lot of investment in terms of research and development that is designed to be appropriated by Brazilian institutions in a more long-term way. And I just recently came across one key example, which ironically doesn't come, but I think it's an interesting provocation for this discussion. Brazil and the United Kingdom just signed an agreement to establish an industrial decarbonization hub. This just happened. We just signed this agreement, and this industrial decarbonization hub is supposed to be a transversal hub to financing different kinds of decarbonization initiatives across the board for the new plan of industrialization that we are about to publish as well. So this is the kind of transversal funding that I think Kai mentions in his report that is conducive to permanent institutions and to a policy of state instead of a policy of government that can have less effects on our economy and on our society. And I think this kind of signal, it's important as well in terms of finding the symmetries in our cooperation, developing those symmetries, strengthening those symmetries. And I think this would be the difference in between what we have now and what we can have. And of course, what we are not saying is, but it is said in the report, is that this may as well be the difference in between the kind of cooperation that we have with the European Union and the kind of cooperation that we have with China. So that's pretty much the main lines and the main settings of the framework of cooperation, where we can differentiate between the cooperation that we have with one and the other. So I think here we can find the practicalities, but also the values. And finally, just one other point that I think should be mentioned, especially because we are all talking about the EU-Mercosur agreement. The other point that you raised in the report is the fact that the EU is very good at supporting civil society and opening up dialogues and spaces for participation with civil society in a way that other partners don't do. But the issue with this agreement so far has been precisely the lack of support from civil society to a great extent. So there is something there that needs to be sorted out. And I think that can be, that's where perhaps it can be demonstrated some kind of goodwill, but also a lot of effectiveness in terms of participation and maybe refurbishing the agreement somehow. I think I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Professor Isabel. Thank you for your comments on the report. You're the privileged one who were able to read before most of the others. So I have a couple questions from the audience, and also those who would like to phrase questions, please just raise your hands, and I can pass the microphone to you. So I have a general question, which is actually it's just a direct question to Professor Kai, when he didn't have the time, which is for him to make his to give his opinion on the ongoing negotiation between Mercosur, European Union, and what would happen, in your opinion, to the bilateral relationship between Brazil and Europe if the agreement now doesn't work out, if the trade deal is not signed, right? That will be, what would be your impressions on that? If Professor Isabel can also elaborate on this question, will be interesting. We received a question from Newton Di Mello from the audience, and also I'll pose the question for the both of you, but also from the both ambassadors if they want to come out and answer. How could Europe cooperate with Mercosur to improve Mercosur's standard of living, which has decreased since the deindustrialization process that started about 20 years ago? I think this is something that is, I think Ambassador Roberto Jaguaribe mentioned that Europeans have, because of their development, that they have different perceptions and different needs than the ones here in Mercosur. So these differences sometimes make harder for both sides to understand their demands and their perceptions. So these are the two main questions. Anyone in the audience would like to pose a question? Professor Leslie, please.
We are discussing Brazil's relations with Europe, and that means inevitably we talk about Brazil and the EU and individual countries within the EU, especially Germany, but there are many European countries that are not in the EU, with which Brazil has very important relations, and this simply shouldn't be forgotten. I mean, two obviously are, one, the UK, which sadly is no longer in the EU, a disastrous decision taken, and the UK is not in the EU, but the UK does have continuing political, economic, cultural relations with Brazil, and as Isabel said, very strong academic relations with Brazil. The University of Oxford is about to establish a major research center in Brazil, the first time that it's ever done this, or any major university has done this on this scale. And the other country, of course, is Russia. Russia is a European country. And if we listen to Mearsheimer, Russia continues to be a major power. With the United States and China, Russia is a major power. And Brazil has relations with Russia, has to have economic and political relations with Russia, not least now because of Ukraine. So I just wanted to draw attention to the fact that we're talking exclusively about Brazil in the EU, but we mustn't forget other countries, notably the UK and Russia.
Thank you, Professor Leslie. One more question from the audience in the back, please.
Good morning. I am Marcelo Mitterhoff from BNDES. I have a just brief commentary. I don't like too much the difference between policy, state policy and government policy, because usually the politics is about difference, about disagreement, and so the policy could change. But sometimes an interest becomes very central in a country, and government policy could turn into state policy. It was the case, for example, the industrialization in Brazil during the last century. And I think we have now a chance to make the ecological transition in a state policy in Brazil, and it's depend on two things, in my opinion. One is we need to deliver the goal to end the illegal deforestation until 2030. But we also need the counterpart of Europe, that is to accelerate the regulatory measures that could benefit the Brazilian industry, the new industrialization associated with the clean energies and other sectors, especially the hard-to-abate sectors. And I think it is the main path that the economic and political relations in Brazil could improve in the next years. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Now I give the floor back. I don't know if both ambassadors have some comments to make right now, or you want to wait for Professor Sky and Isabel, then you make your comments, or?
I could say something on the before last question, actually. First, thank you. I think both contributions of Kai and Isabel were very important and relevant, and at times it's also good for people in my position to think of how to get across the message to people and not only to governments. And this requires an effort which needs also resources, especially in a country which is big as a continent. But the goal is clear there, to reach out really deep into the country. I think to bring it into 1-2 sentences, what the EU-Brazil relationship really is about in the years to come. This is to develop a joint vision and way of implementation, how to transform an economy sustainably. This will be the challenge of the years to come, at least in Europe, but actually in all major countries in this world. And these countries will have the role of an example. For example, if a country like Germany, with its huge industry and trade, manages her economy change fundamentally to a sustainable industrial country. This is a major shift, and we are trying to sign EU-Mercosur also to do this shift together and to interlink our two regions in order to have in both regions a very modern, sustainable economy and society. And I'm convinced also that a country like Brazil will gain geopolitically and internationally through leadership in that regard. And President Lula is on a great way to do that. He occupies a prime space in environmental and climate policies worldwide now. And with the COP30, he will do even more so. So the EU's place on Brazil's side brings about money for research, it brings about technology, it brings about more value added while exporting critical raw materials. And in my view, the decline of industry in Brazil is linked to the increase of agricultural exports to China. So we have to complement these developments with more cooperation in the field of newest green technology and other newest technologies. That's why we focus on digital cooperation as well, because the place of countries in the world to come will be defined by their level in technology and research, among others, of course. But that's why we are having from today on a high-ranking research delegation, and that's the last thing I want to say in this context. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Professor Kai, I don't know, Ambassador Roberto Jaguaribe, you want to say, some words, or you want to wait? You're muted.
I'm going to wait until the end to say my final remarks.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for the questions. Always a good sign if there's a lot of questions. So I'll go to them in turn. The EU-Mercosur agreement, if it doesn't come to pass, in practical terms, purely practical terms, it'll make no difference at all because it'll just continue as it was. In political terms, I think it'll be really bad. Quite frankly, I think it will be a bitter blow to the European Union. At the end of the day, we are talking about what would potentially be the biggest trade deal ever politically. You can sell. I always go on about this. You know, how can you sell something? You can sell this very well if it happens. If it doesn't happen, you have to explain somehow why you've wasted 20 years of your life to bring something to a non-conclusion. That's not good. For Mercosur, I actually think, I remember an Argentine colleague once saying to me that Mercosur is still going simply because the cost of shutting it down would be higher than the cost of keeping it going as it is. So for Mercosur, I think it would be a huge boost because it shows relevance. You're here, you're actually doing something practical. So I do hope, and I say this in the report as one of my first recommendations when we talk about economic relations, is to bring this deal over the line whatever way possible. So I hope it happens. The second part on different perceptions of Mercosur between Europe and Latin America and South America, I think that's been a constant problem, both in policy terms and in academic terms. I don't know how many articles there are comparing Mercosur to the European Union, and they're simply not the same. They never have been the same, and they won't be the same. I once had Mercosur, or regionalism in South America, described to me as a pragmatic tool to solve specific problems, to address specific problems. And I think if we think about Mercosur in those terms, then I think we might get closer to where we are and what we could do to make it relevant again. Because it's never going to be, or it's never going to have the same normative basis that the European Union, for obvious historical reasons, has. And I mean, I've argued many times that the European Union is actually a sort of split personality in that respect. They're very normative in many ways, but they're very good actually at defending their own interests in very realist terms when they want to, especially when it comes to trade. I think the European Union has always been more than a normative power, but it is clearly more of a normative power than, say, Brazil or Mercosur would like to be. On the third point, Brazil and other European countries, I totally agree. I lived in England for 15 years. I love the country to bits. It breaks my heart to see what's happening to it. And I've talked about it on many occasions. You are quite right. I think the UK will remain to be a really important partner to Brazil, both in economic terms and certainly in educational and research terms. And I hope it does. So that's, you know, that's a given. I think how we deal with that in the context of the debates more strategically, I think is an issue to be addressed, which I haven't addressed, and I think many of us haven't adjusted to that yet. With regards to Russia, well, yeah, it'll still be there for better or worse. If for whatever reason it ends up gaining, in inverted commas, territory in Ukraine post-war, then it'll be a different proposition. And if it actually loses the war, as I think it should, whether it will, I don't know. I have my doubts. 6 months ago, I was considerably more optimistic than I am today. But there you go. I think it would be really difficult for us to say, how do we deal with Russia, or how do we include Russia in these debates without knowing how this war will play out. Play out is a horrible word to use in that context, but how this war will impact the strategic relationship also between Russia and China, which obviously will have a huge impact here, bearing in mind China's role as a main investor in Latin America. And with regards to the final point about the distinction between a policy of state and a policy of government, I get that. It is not a very neat division, but I think we can make this. We can make it. In the report, I actually make Brazil, for instance, has had a very clear line in foreign policy to use foreign policy also, not exclusively, but also as an instrument for economic development and so forth. That's been a policy for decades, which spans several governments across several ideological spectrums. So I think we can make that distinction. Whether it'll come to it, whether it'll pass to be a policy of state, I don't know yet. We'll see.
Well, I'll be very brief then. I think we are out of time. Just very quickly, what about if the agreement doesn't come to pass? Well, it's a difficult question. Of course, you shouldn't just throw out 20 years of negotiations, but I think that it needs to be said that it's not only the environmental issues that were pointed out by President Lula, but when you also have Paulo Nogueira, who was the vice president of the New Development Bank, saying that the agreement doesn't do good to our industry sector. Then you also have civil society saying that it would kill the small farm holders. Then there's a lot that needs to be discussed. And I think that the fact that it will come back to the table, that it has come back to the table, is not necessarily bad in those terms. But it is a fact that it would be a waste of a long time of negotiations. In terms of what it could be, what it could do in terms of the life quality in Mercosur, I think one of the key contributions that Brazil can make for these discussions, and it has to do with the academic history of Brazil, is in regards to local development. And as I was saying, the EU is a great partner in terms of proximity with civil society, but in very technical terms, what that comes down to is the fact that we're talking about the territory, we're talking about local development, and that can be measured. We're talking about implementation of this green transition. We are talking about implementation of those environmental projects, and those impacts can be measured, and civil society should be involved on those projects. And I think this is something that Brazil can contribute a lot on, especially coming from critical geography and all our academic traditions in that regard. But I'll stop here.
Thank you, Professor Isabel. Ambassador Roberto Jaguaribe, por favor.
Thank you very much. Just to say that I very much appreciated the contributions made by Kai. I had a very, the embassy shut down, unfortunately, 2 days before President Lula came because of an inundation that had to close down the electric system. So I didn't receive many things, including his paper, only during the weekend. But I think it's a very interesting contribution. I just want to add 2 or 3 things. First, Mercosur. Mercosur is a very logical consequence of the relations between Europe and South America, especially the Mercosur countries. In my view, it would be an act of irrationality not to have it concluded. I think it is extremely beneficial to both sides for completely different reasons. I think for the Mercosur countries, it's essentially a political benefit, which has economic impact as well. I think that I like to say this here because I have to provoke the Europeans to a certain extent. I say that China is a very good partner, but is not a model. Europe is not a good partner, but it is a model. And of course, the model is what really shaped Mercosur from the beginning. It's the inspiration of the European integration. And I think the benefit for Latin America and for Mercosur countries is the hat that the big hat with that is going to cover us. I think there's also a benefit, especially for Brazil, but for other Mercosur countries as well, of the additional discipline that it will have to have. And this, to a certain extent, extends also to OCDE. I think one of the problems of Brazil is lack of discipline. And I think that this is going to bring benefits. I think for Europe, it is even more madness and not to come to Mercosur, because they have the advantage of a lower tariff to the 5th largest market in the world. 12% lower industrial tariff in the 5th largest market in the world at the moment when Europe is not competitive. Europe has problems derived from its success, many problems. Europe has generated the most attractive society of openness, democracy, public goods in transportation, education, security, culture, all of that. But it's a very expensive model. And it is not competitive. And it's not facing this down because Europe has loads of money and it doesn't live from work, it lives from investments. But it's the time is going to come where they're going to have to face the issues, even for environmental purposes, because strength and power today are really control of the narrative. And in relation to environmental sustainability and agricultural procedures, Europe has the control of the narrative. But in fact, Europe is not really sustainable. Europe imports sustainability. Europe has difficulty in raw materials, in energy, especially in sustainable energy. And the whole issue that is in question now is how are we going to deal with the abundance of sustainable energy that we can produce? Is it going to become the same thing as with raw materials, between sustainability here, development there, or we're going to add value to what we have here? Is it going to be a new form of environmental neocolonialism, or are we going to have something to say with the energy that we produce? But again, coming back, I think that this would be a very great pity not to have this follow through. Both sides benefit significantly from that. And it also binds something which I think is very important, and is the political dimension of democracy. Democracy is totally under challenge throughout the world, in different perception, different modes. It has to do with many different things. And it's also under challenge in Europe. And we would think that it would not be, because it has been so long consolidated here, but this is not the case. In relation to other countries, I think Leslie is absolutely correct. Especially the UK has a very, very important role to play. I think it's easier actually to negotiate with the UK because it's only one country and it's more trade-oriented, open trade-oriented than Europe effectively is. So I think we can foster many good things with the UK and other countries, smaller countries that are not part. Russia, of course, is a different thing, completely different thing. I'm not sure I agree with the concept that Russia is a superpower. I think there are only two superpowers in the world, China and the United States. I think Russia is a very relevant country, especially in strategic elements, but not so much in many other fronts. And that doesn't mean that it cannot be a very good partner for many countries in South America, especially for trade and economic purposes and other things as well. But finally, I think that we are in a very, very strategic element here. I think that for Brazil, keeping the model that Europe has always been is very important. That's my vision, of course, because there are different visions. I think that it is slipping because Europe has diminished its role model in Latin America, even in Mercosur, which is the most importantly attached part of Latin America to Europe. And I think Mercosur-European Union trade agreement will do a lot to revive this relationship. But of course, we are all going to survive, and we are going to turn increasingly more to Asia if this doesn't come about. And Europe will have to face its challenges, especially with industry. I mean, how can you call an industry that depends on imported raw material, imported energy, and increasingly on imported workers sustainable? It's really not the case. So I think that this is something that can be done. That we don't want to reopen negotiations. I think this would be completely out of the question and make it very difficult to have any conclusion. We have to do it very, very quickly. We lost a little slot because of the Argentinian issue, but it's open again. I think we have to really confront the issues now and come through, because I think this is what is really going to open once again the relation between Brazil and the European Union. But of course, Brazil is going to pursue continuously our issues with individual countries, such as we have now with Germany, which I think is going to be very successful. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador Roberto Jaguaribe. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for being here. We're closing the panel. I'd like to thank CAS for the strong support they have received on this project and the years, throughout the years, and also for 2024. Welcome Maximilian to Brazil. He speaks very good Portuguese, so he'll be very comfortable here in Brazil for the next years. And thank you again for everyone to be here. Bye-bye.